house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hey everybody, it's Ian back again for another episode of Native Film Talk. And it is so good to be done with school. I am officially a graduate of the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. So, I'm free. It's all behind me now. My family couldn't be more relieved, and I couldn't be more relieved, especially because of the show. I can dedicate the time I had for the show. When I started this in October, I started it when I had kind of a lighter course load, and I just had this feeling of like, I gotta do it. You know, Parasite, I needed to do an episode on that. Last of the Mohicans, Pocahontas, I just had enough momentum that I just said, screw it, I'm gonna do it. Let's just see what happens. Let's see where this goes. And whether or not it was the right thing to do, I think, or responsible thing to do with my time, I ended up starting the podcast. So, you know, we just decided to go with it, and here we are, 27. Now this is episode 20. I can't believe we're at 28 episodes. That's insane. And yeah, so today, to get back into the swing of things, I wanted to do something a little bit lighter that I had just dismissed as an Instagram post. But I really, as I dug more into it and thought more about this movie, Zombieland, I'm like, hey, I could make a whole episode about this because, I mean, who else is going to do that? You will not find another podcast where they're going to make a whole episode around a 2-minute clip in an entire movie that has a runtime of an hour and 21 minutes-ish. So, you know, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for all your support that you've been giving me through Instagram and Facebook, and I really appreciate all the kind words for, you know, congratulatory messages and just saying, like, hang in there throughout the whole thing. And I really tried to build up a backlog while I was in school so I could continue to push out consistent content throughout my program. And, you know, kudos to my wife, first and foremost to my wife, for just, you know, bearing with me as we got through this whole program and got through this, you know, labor of love. I love doing this podcast, and yeah, let's just get right into it. I think that pushing it out a week at a time, one episode a week, was a little ambitious. I don't know what I was thinking. So I may or may not flex that to a week and a half to 2 weeks. We'll see how that goes. But right now, let's get on to it. This movie, directed by Ruben Fleischer. Why did I say David? Ruben Fleischer. He really hasn't done a whole lot of movies up to this point. He did like some short stuff. He primarily was in music videos, directing music videos. So when he came across Zombieland in 2009, he was like, hey, this was his first feature film, full-length feature film. And I think he did a great job. It was different. It was, depending on where you are in the zombie love, if you are a zombie purist, you probably don't like this movie. You probably think this is trash because it's making a mockery of the entire genre. Hi, Jay. If you're someone like me who's more of a casual zombie viewer, then you might appreciate this. I see this in the same vein as movies like Shaun of the Dead or Army of Darkness. To me, it's just a spoofy kind of way to look at things, very campy, very on the nose in some areas, and I just really enjoy it. So let's get into the cast. I'm only going to talk about 4 people in here. I guess I'll add 5 with Bill Murray, but Jesse Eisenberg as Columbus, a.k.a. Mark Zuckerberg, a.k.a. Lex Luthor. Those are the movies I know most from. And then Woody Harrelson as Tallahassee. This is probably my favorite role that he has outside of being Roy Munson in Kingpin. He's just fantastic in this. And his role in No Country for Old Men, really not talked about enough, but he did fantastic in that one as well. And then Emma Stone as Wichita. I loved her in Superbad, killed it in Superbad, Easy A. And Birdman and Crazy Stupid Love, I love those roles too. They were solid. And then Abigail Breslin as Little Rock, who is her sister in this movie. And I loved her in Little Miss Sunshine. And she does a great job in this movie too. So, Ian, what the hell does this movie have to do with Native representation? Well, I'll get to it. Because there is a specific scene after the 4 meet up. When they randomly are on their way, they decide as a group, we're going to head on to California together. They have their spats along the way, and they decide to meet up and join forces and say, all right, well, at least go to the coast together. They randomly come across a roadside trading post. And that 2-minute scene is the whole reason why I'm doing this, because I always saw that as a native person, and I'll get to the plot leading up to that a little bit later. But as a person, and I think any native person, I'm sure we saw this movie and we're like, what the fuck was that? Where did that come from? That scene where they just go into that shop. Well, one, it's a randomly placed shop on the side of the road, supposed to be post-apocalyptic, and there's electricity all over the place. Unless this place is running on hydro, I don't know how that's still happening, but I think that it really was just driving the point home of this is something that you're releasing stress. It's a way to release stress. It's like doing something that you would only do in a post-apocalyptic environment. It's just to just be a bull in a china shop, essentially. But it was oddly placed. As a native person, I'm just like, what the hell? And then it comes as fast as it goes. It's only it really is a 2-minute scene. And it's never addressed. It's never referenced. They don't call back to it of like, hey, remember when we destroyed that trading post? That was a lot of fun. It just randomly happens, and then they move on. You could have cut this 2-minute scene out of the movie, and I'm positive it wouldn't have affected the movie at all in a positive or a negative way. But, let's go ahead and get on to it. I always had questions about this, but nobody ever talked about it. Parasite, it was at least addressed a few times in interviews. To me, I like these movies where there's smaller representation because people went to watch Zombieland because it was a cool zombie movie. They didn't go to get native representation, but that's what they got. They got native representation in there, and I think it's just important to talk about because trading posts, this is what it was, it has a very long history on Indian country. To this day, they're still a little messy. The reason why trading posts have a long history in Indian country is because these were essential locations. These were hubs. These were the banks. These were the social gathering locations. Back in the day, trading posts is what towns were built around. They needed commerce to build around trading posts because people would flock to these areas so much that they're like, hey, let's build a brothel, let's build a bar, let's build a trading post, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And you start expanding on these locations, and these towns would form around these trading posts. And natives who did not adopt into the United States currency and were not into that currency, needed a way to get into the currency, rather. They needed a way to get some cash to be able to, or some kind of currency to be able to exercise buying power in the community. So they came, that's why they're called trading posts, because they would barter. They would bring pelts, meat, livestock, and natives. Now, traditionally, more recently, they would really capitalize on the pawn side of the business. These trading posts, they would use pawn along with trade. They would pawn and trade in exchange for store credit. And so you can see how a marginalized community, how a community that's impoverished can become marginalized in one of these systems by a trading post owner, especially if they're landlocked and the only way you can get there is horse and buggy. And you're like, hey, we're the only game in town. The other trading post is, next state over or next town over. That's another week's ride. Are you going to take the prices I'm going to give you, or are you going to keep going for another week and try your luck there? So there's a long history of trading posts on Indian country and predatory practices on that. And there's a whole point to this. That's why I'm leading up to this. But when they throw in something as simple as Kimosabi Trading Post, that's what the title of the location was in the movie. It's much deeper than just crappy trading posts. And I'm going to get into that because the DVD commentary revealed why this was in the movie. And I thought it was pretty freaking cool. But let's go ahead and get into the plot review, and then we'll dive into it. So basically, this is a lone survivor movie. It starts out, you meet up with Jesse Eisenberg at first. He starts out, his name's Columbus, and he eventually goes, and they kind of have his origin story of like how he first came across the apocalypse and how he found out the apocalypse was happening. And then he eventually meets up with Tallahassee. I'm going to blow through this pretty quick. He meets up with Woody Harrelson, and they're like, hey, they're a little dodgy at first, but then they're like, okay, we'll meet up. And they decide to join forces, and they go raid a grocery store. In the process of raiding the grocery store, they come across Wichita and Little Rock, Emma Stone and Little Rock. I can't remember her name. Abigail and Emma Stone. And they run across them, and they're running a hustle. Little Rock pretends to be bit, and she needs to be put down. But her sister Wichita can't do it. So she's like, you know what? You do it. give me your gun. And then, or yeah, as they're about to do it, it's like, no, I do it. She's my sister. I need to do this. Give me your gun. I'll take care of her. And then, boom, flips the switch, takes them for all they're worth, puts the boys on foot, takes off. So then boys, they're on foot. Eventually they find a nice cache of guns and ammo and a nice vehicle. And what do? They run into them again. The girls run the same. It's not the same hustle, but they run a hustle on them again, a bait and switch. They see a downed vehicle, start pursuing on foot. Boom, get taken for all they're worth again. But then the difference is they have a little bit of a standoff. And then they decide like, hey. All four of us got guns pointing here. All of us can pull the trigger right now. We're probably going to all die. It's better, we're the first people we've seen in who knows how long. Let's just join forces. Where are you going? I'm headed west. Are you headed west? We'll at least stay together until it makes sense till we need to part ways. And then so they decide to do that. And on their way to just head out, Columbus is like, I'm called Columbus because I'm from Columbus. I need to go find my home, my parents. My parents are still in Columbus. I need to get there. And then basically they're just like, he finds out from Wichita, like, hey, Columbus is pretty much done. Columbus is toast. And so he's devastated, and he's like, all right, fine. I'll just go with you all to California. Let's just keep riding. Let's just keep riding in the night. And so they decide to stay, and they go. They go together, and they're driving at night. And randomly, on their way to California, based on what they destroyed in the store, I'm going to assume that they were in Arizona. But the group drives by at night. They pass a billboard with a light, and it says Kimosabi Trading Post. And it is so quick, if you blink, you will miss it. But the slogan is, we want 'em, you're wampum. With some random buffalo looking silhouettes painted on it. So the backstory on this, if you didn't know, the actual location for this scene was in Rutledge, just east of Atlanta, where most of the movie was shot. Most of it was shot in Atlanta, and there were a few scenes shot in LA, but this is primarily shot in Georgia. And the actual trading post, this doesn't exist. This entire thing is a mock-up. It's made up in a warehouse. They got a warehouse in Rutledge, and they backfilled it with all this native shit. So everything you see, the Kimosabi, the giant native sculpture up in front, the big, wooden-looking Indian up there, the Kimosabi holding up the how hand, and all the signs and all the arrows pointing in the ground. I thought when I saw that, I'm like, oh, they repurposed an actual roadside arts and crafts store. Or maybe they found somewhere and they said like, hey, I'll buy out your inventory and then we'll just trash the place, and then you can start over. That was my assumption. I didn't know they had recreated a whole goddamn trading post in the middle of nowhere. I say nowhere. I don't know where Rutledge is exactly, but all I know is it's east of Atlanta. But they just really just outfitted a warehouse full of native shit, and native-looking shit, I should say, and they did that. So it was crazy. So now this assortment makes even less sense to me, because it's not like they were scouting a location and they were like, hey, that'd be cool to trash. They specifically had a native arts and crafts trading post in mind, and they wanted to do that. And it seemed over the top. Now it seems even more. So there's no native people in this that I know of. No native people in the cast, in anywhere, production, crew, anything. But this native representation matters because it's 3 minutes tops in this hour-and-a-half movie, but this matters because this is what quote-unquote resistance looks like to a non-native person. I watched the DVD commentary. When you watch the DVD commentary, it's just a movie with a select group of people. Sometimes it's the DP, the director of photography. Sometimes it's the head writer. Sometimes it's the actors themselves. And in this instance, for the Zombieland special features, you had the director, you had Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, and the head writer. They were sitting there watching this and commentating on the movie. And so when they got to this scene, this is what the director said. This is another scene that was on the bubble. For some reason, audiences, they love the interactions with Jesse and the perfume and the spray. But this scene where they start smashing shit seems pretty gratuitous to some audiences. But what I intended when I asked the writers to come up with this was to just have the joy of doing something in a world where only in a post-apocalyptic world can you smash the shit out of a racist trading post. Despite what everyone thinks, I'm really proud of this scene. I think it's really cool. And that's the end of it. But the director, so leading up to this, what I didn't describe was the interaction between Jesse Eisenberg and Woody Harrelson. All four of them in the movie, they flock into this and they're just kind of browsing. They didn't drive into this saying like, hey, they just said, I need a pit stop. They drive into this trading post thinking they're just going to look around. So they're just trying on hats. And as they're panning across the room, you can see there's just headdresses and drums and jewelry and pottery and just random roadside stuff. There's no rhyme or reason, but it just looks like Indian shit. All smattered all throughout the store. And at this point, Jesse Eisenberg is making it known that he has feelings for Wichita, Emma Stone. And so he's like eyeballing her, out the side of his eye, trying to like look at her, get a good glance at her. Woody Harrelson notices this. And he's like, oh, you're trying to get with Wichita over there. And then he, at that point, Jesse's trying to deny it. Columbus is trying to deny it. He eventually pisses off Wichita because he sprayed himself with some perfume and he smelled like petunia. And he gives Columbus crap. He's like, well, good luck with that, Petunia. And Jesse Eisenberg sprays him out of spite. And then Woody Harrelson punches him in the arm. And as he's punched, he gets knocked back and knocks over a piece of pottery. And everyone stops and freezes. And they're like, holy shit, you just knocked over a piece of Native American art. You just knocked over something sacred, seemingly. Something that you could never do. You just, where's the owner? Where's the people? Surely someone's going to come out and say, holy shit, you can't do that. You need to pay for that. And once they all kind of give a glance to each other of like, holy shit, this is not real life. This is a post-apocalyptic world we're living in. We can do whatever we want. And then the destruction ensues. And then you see a slow montage develop where they just start trashing stuff. All the drums go off. They have these fake tomahawks. They're just hitting into drums, hitting into these cheap made-in-China drums. You see these made-in-China looking, I say made-in-China, but really just super commercial, not made by anybody native. They're just cheap headdresses for profit. And they're made out of plastic feathers and shit. And you just see, with Little Rock wearing one of these, running through with a spear, a fake spear that's like clearly, drawn for a child, or like painted for a child. But yeah, I mean, this is just a trashy arts and crafts store. And they're destroying it. They're destroying everything. And with no direction. This just whole slow montage develops. And they're destroying rings and pottery. And so that's where it got me. At first, I was like, this is pretty interesting. I don't know what to make of this. But they're destroying stuff like, when they get to the fake headdresses and cheap drums, I'm like, all right, I'm on board for this. But then the pottery looked real. Me coming from the Southwest, when they started pushing over the pottery, I'm like, that shit looks real. You're telling me, now that I know what I know now, that they bought all that pottery from somewhere to have it shipped to Rutledge, Atlanta, just to destroy it? Also, the jewelry, the raw material, I say raw, the bulk jewelry that was there, they end up tipping that shit over. Like, that looks real. You could make jewelry out of that. You could actually make jewelry out of that stuff. But they just tipped it over, and they were like, yeah, post-apocalyptic world, fuck this place. And even the name, Kemosabe Store. Kemosabe obviously is a place, comes from the old, kind of Western, so that was the label given to the natives, but there's no stores called Kemosabe anymore. Like, that's kind of an exaggeration of where the stores are. It'll say, like, Big Chief, or it'll say, and if there's a Kemosabe store, I wouldn't be surprised. But I haven't seen any here in the Southwest. That's where this is supposed to be based out of. There's definitely some, like, Big Chief, Chief Yellow Horse, Chief this, Chief that, and some, like, some teepees set up that, aren't really teepees or just roadside shit. And so this was his interpretation, a non-native interpretation of what a trading post looks like, or what a trading post destruction looks like. And I think it's interesting because that's why I kind of tried to talk about the history with trading posts in Indian country, because to him, he's like, it would be great if you could just, in a post-apocalyptic world, destroy all of this, destroy this racist trading post. And the name itself is racist. And the capitalization and the monetization of exploiting culture is definitely, I don't know, racist is a strong word, but it's definitely taking advantage of the powerless. I really don't like broad brushing racism, that word. I think it needs to be very specific. To me, when I use that, it needs to be very specific. I try to explain things, and if what I'm explaining is racism, so be it. But exploiting a culture by exploiting a culture for profit, and especially inaccurate representation of that culture for profit, for a community that will see no benefit from that, they'll see no financial gain from that. That is the spirit of what they were trying to destroy in the movie. That's what they were trying to destroy in the movie. A gross misrepresentation of who Native people are and destruction of property in a post-apocalyptic world that normally would be chastised and normally would be looked down upon. But in this movie, they did this with, and there was nobody wagging their finger of like, hey, whoa, that pottery's real, bro. Don't destroy that. You can destroy the headdresses, destroy the drums, don't destroy the pottery. So why I bring all this up? How trading posts come about in Indian country. They came about, going back to what I said at the beginning of the episode, they came about because natives needed a means to get money. So they came to the trading post to trade for currency. And there's exploitation that would be involved in these because typically they were purposely put next to reservations. You know, eventually they were put there because like, hey, you have good opportunity here. These natives have a lot of stuff that they can trade. There's a lot of commerce that can be moved, and we're going to move some of these trade routes to be right next to native nations so that way we can get more money, can capitalize on the resources. And so pawning became a big practice because native people needed a way to use their possessions when they couldn't generate meat, when they couldn't give pelts, when they couldn't give livestock, when they didn't have anything else. The assets that they could give, you know, to be liquidated were their rugs. For Navajos, their rugs, their jewelry, and they would give up these things in exchange for a set amount of money, and they would be held by the owner of the store. You know, if you don't know how pawn shops work. And of course, an interest is paid on that for the duration that pawn is kept. And if you don't pay that pawn after a certain amount of time, then it becomes a dead pawn, quote unquote. And you're like, okay, you got a year to pay this back or whatever it is. It's 30 days, 60 days. After that, if you can't pay me back that $200 that I gave you plus interest, then it becomes a dead pawn and now I own it. And I can do whatever I want with it. And so people, natives, would specifically flock to these trading posts because they knew if I go to a bank, what do I have? I don't have cash. I don't know how a bank works. And all I have at this point is just stuff that's valuable. So I'm going to go to the trading post and I'm going to get my food that way. I'm going to, you know, when cars eventually came out, I'm going to be able to get money to get a loan on a car from the trading post to pawn all my jewelry. I'm not going to get a loan from the bank. I don't have a job. I don't have a freaking paycheck that I can produce to validate a loan. So you would use these trading posts, and there was predatory practices, and there's a point to all this. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, eventually launched an investigation in the 1970s and found there were predatory practices in all trading posts across Indian country. The ones they specifically investigated 95% of all the trading posts that were closest in proximity to Indian country, to native reservations. They specifically looked at those because they had been given enough tips that, like, hey, there might be something shady going on. And so they found instances of hidden interest charges. So somebody would come and pay what they thought was the full pawn plus interest, and they were like tacking on these hidden interest charges. They would have predatory lending on the pawn. They would look at these people knowing like, hey, these people need flour, these people need wheat, these people need milk, these people need resources, these people are desperate for cash. I am going to give them the rock bottom money possible on that pawn because I know that this is probably going to become a dead pawn anyway. They're not going to pay me back. So I'm going to give them this, this squash blossom is worth, $400. I'm going to give them a pawn for $100, for $50. And so you give them that knowing like this is basically going to be mine in 30 days anyway. So I'm going to do that. And then when I am done with that, when that dead pawn turns over to me, I'm going to go and sell that thing for $800. So these non-native people that come through this trading post can sell that. So that's how these trading posts started turning out this stuff. They started becoming these central hubs for native art, native jewelry, native everything. So then natives would see like, hey, I can make money. Not just in pawn, but in this too. So they would go there, sell their rugs, sell their stuff, and they would almost at wholesale prices know that trading post is be like, hey, I'm going to upsell that rug. I'll give you that rug for $500. Even though I'm going to sell it for $5,000, I can give you $500. 5 Benjis right here. Boom, 5 C notes now yours that you wouldn't have otherwise. They would do that. They would take advantage of these native situation. So when the owner also, you know, if you even know how pawns work, you're always given those yellow tickets. If you've ever been to a TNR or anything like that, you're always given those yellow tickets. The FTC found so many instances of where the pawn owner would purposely write in the ledger illegibly when they were dealing with native people. So that way, even if they came back to say they paid or they're going to pay, they're like, your name doesn't match with what I'm seeing here. You said Ben Yazi? I don't see that here. I see something else. That doesn't match with what I wrote down. And I wrote it. I know my handwriting. And then eventually, so then it would turn into dead pawn so they could flip it. Or the ticket, they would say, I was just here last week. I have my money now. Here you go. You know, you gave me $200 last week. Now it's $200 plus interest. Here you go. It's only been a week. You remember me. You gave me this money for that jewelry. And they would say, well, where's your pawn ticket? Well, I lost it. A rainstorm happened. You know, it's a tiny yellow ticket. I don't have the ticket. Well, I can't give you your pawn if you don't have the ticket. You got the money, but how am I to know that you're just not somebody impersonating who the actual owner of this pawn is? I can't do that as a responsible business owner in this community. I can't be trusted with that kind of just willy-nilly regulation. And then they would turn it into dead pawn and flip it and sell it to somebody. And so there's all kinds of stuff they would do. You know, and then if they didn't have the cash, they would say, well, you know, you got $300 to take this out of pawn, but I noticed you came in here and you sold one of our frequent customers here a nice big old rug. If you got another one of those rugs laying around, you could bring one of those in. I might be able to clear this pawn for you. Knowing that rug is probably worth 10x. But you back this person into a corner. And so you're capitalizing on their situation. And I'm not saying all trading posts are like this, but there's enough trading posts out there to be able to safe to say, and based on the FTC, the Foreign Trades and Commission's investigation in the 1970s, to say like trading posts were like this. They were predatory. That's how native commercialization of like native crafts, arts and crafts started happening, was because of these fucking trading posts. People would come through and see an opportunity to make money off of native shit. So that's how you start commercializing that. You see somebody that owns a big factory like, I can make this. They're paying how much for that? Are you serious? I'll call up my factory right now and send a mock-up. We can start churning this shit out today and making money if that's what's in style. And we see instances of that in designs. I mean, it recirculates in history. It's cyclical in history. In the 70s, everybody wanted to be an Indian. People were buying native shit, and, you know, it goes in and out of fashion. And, then, you know, you see the Victoria's Secret models coming down the runway wearing headdresses. You see it in Urban Outfitters. You see it now with the resurgence of putting Pendleton shit on everything. It happens. So, yeah, it's crazy. When I went and looked into these laws and history of trading posts, I mean, I knew some of this, but I didn't know any of this was that bad. What's crazy, too, is, like, the worst thing about trading posts, nobody's going to call foul. If you accept a pawn as a means of exchange, like, no one's going to say, like, hey, are you doing something that's right? You know, and there are investigations in the pawn shops all the time, but especially ones that are right next to native people. Native people, we don't, I joke about it, about the Michelle Latterby thing way back in the day of, like, natives don't sue. Like, but we really don't, because we don't know that that's available to us. We don't know. So we're not going to go and call the Foreign Trades Commission. We're not going to say, hey, I'm going to call the FTC on you. We don't know that the Better Business Bureau exists and that we can submit claims and customer service complaints and shit. We don't know any of that. We don't know that. And so we are ripe to be taken advantage of. So these stores, yes, are racist in the sense that they've capitalized on people, a group of people, for a long fucking time. And these trading posts mostly, predominantly, I'm going to say 100% of the time. Maybe now it's different. Maybe they change hands. But back in the day, they were owned 100% by non-natives. And they would say, oh yeah, I'm a trusted member of the community. I'm a trusted member of the community. I am a hub of trading. I work with these people. They trust me. They come to me. It's like, yeah, probably out of necessity. If they had another location to go to, I'm pretty sure and then you got competition. Then you got close to a fair market. But I'm positive these people saw an opportunity to exploit the native people. So, what do you do with that? You come up with a scene in a movie that says Kemosabe Trading Post. You're like, that's sticking it to them. Let's destroy all that shit. That's the destroying Indian stuff on their way to California. That's sticking it to the man. That's doing something that's rebellious. That's doing something that matters. That feels good in a post-apocalyptic world. And this whole scene was just to drive the point home of there are these set rules in Zombieland. Like cardio, double tap, beware of bathrooms, seatbelts, don't be a hero, limber up, when in doubt, know your way out, check the back seat. This one was Rule 32, the last rule in this movie, enjoy the little things. And to this movie, destroying a trading post was enjoying the little things in a post-apocalyptic world. I can tell you as a native person, I maybe would take all the stuff out of the store before I burn the place down, but I'd burn that place down. Sticking it to the man isn't destroying all the resources. Sticking it to the man would be burning the whole place down. Not just destroying the stuff in it. Because in a real world, all that stuff, maybe not all, but some of that stuff was actually made by native people. And I would hate to be the people that actually made some of that stuff and to be watching this movie and be like, what the fuck? Where did this come from? So I thought it was interesting. I got some final thoughts at the end, but let's go ahead and wrap this movie up. So after this, they go on to California. They make it to California, and they decide, hey, Pacific Playland just right there. They're trying to all get to Pacific Playland because that's where Abigail wants to go. That's where Wichita and Little Rock have been trying to go this entire movie because to them, they're like, that is the safe haven. That is the one place that's untouched by zombies, by walkers. That's the last place that we can go, that we can even have some semblance of reality. On their way, they decide to stop at Bill Murray's house. And this is great because they do this walk of, like one of those maps of Hollywood, all the celebs' favorite houses. And they go to Bill Murray's house, not knowing he's there, only to find he's alive. And this is one of the greatest cameos of all time. To me, cameo appearances ever. It's up there for Wedding Crashers in Will Ferrell in Wedding Crashers. And he's, I almost nunchucked you. You don't even realize, Mom, where's the meatloaf? I never know what she's doing back there. And Tom Cruise is in Tom Cruise in Tropic Thunder as Les Grossman. Just those are my two. And then this one, Bill Murray. His cameo appearance was legendary. So then after they shoot him, they accidentally kill him. Hang out in the mansion. Wichita and Columbus have a little bit of an intimate moment. Wichita gets a little dodgy. She's like, this is too much. I can't be getting into shit. It's just me and Little Rock. We got to bounce. So then they take off in the morning. They press on the Pacific Playland by themselves to find out it isn't overrun. And of course, they start riding on the rides. They're able to turn on some generators, turn on some power. I don't think there's generators, but they turn on some power. They start riding the rides, and then the horde comes because they see all the lights. And of course, they're riding a ride, and they get overrun. And then to the rescue, Tallahassee and Columbus come and make a daring rescue attempt for Wichita and Little Rock. And, Tallahassee has this cool last stand scene where he locks himself in a ticket booth to allow Columbus to go rescue Wichita and Little Rock. And this last stand scene was cool because he just has his two Desert Eagles in that ticket booth, and it's just coming from all sides, all the zombies, and you think this is it. This looks like it's it. He ends up coming out on top. It would have been better if he died. It would have been cooler, been more badass. But I was thinking too, it's like, which one's better, this one or Gisagoo's final stand in Blood Quantum? I vote for Gisagoo because that shit was original as fuck. So eventually, after that last stand, where he lives, so it's not really a last stand, they rummage through a candy store after the smoke's cleared, everyone's rescued. They rummage through a candy store to try to find a Twinkie, because Tallahassee, through this entire movie, is like, hey, these Twinkies have an expiration date. I need to find a Twinkie before it expires. And Columbus panic shoots through a door. He's got a shotgun this whole time, a double-barreled shotgun. Some buckshot just ruins this box of Twinkies. And we thought, like, well, he's not going to get a Twinkie. All is lost. We're going to end the movie on a bit of a somber note because Tallahassee couldn't find his Twinkie. And then we find out the girls, really didn't ditch him. They're waiting for him outside, and they have a Twinkie for Tallahassee. And he smiles, and the movie's over. So, while it was a quick scene, there was a lot to talk about. There was a lot of history in that one thing of the director saying, like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we destroyed this racist fucking store? There's a lot to be said for knowing your history a little bit more. And I'm not chastising him in any way. I'm not chastising him. I'm just presenting all of this for people to decide, because it's a weird, if nothing else, you furrow your eyebrows when you watch this scene. You're just like, what the hell was that all about? It was a way for the group to demolish something that, in an environment where it would only be acceptable in a post-apocalyptic world. When you think about it, this is the only option. They're driving from the East Coast to the West Coast. What's going to be on the roadside? Tourist traps. Some of the tourist traps are going to be native arts and crafts stores. So it could have been that. When you really think about it, you're like, what else could they have destroyed? This is probably all they had. Outside of a gas station. But at that point, it could be looked at as like wasting food. But it could have been empty aisles. And, could have walked into the gas station. It could have been rummaged already. They could have been busting, I don't know, refrigerator doors, glass refrigerator doors, and, pushed over the aisleways. But nope, they decided to do this. And it was probably expensive as fuck. All that pottery, I'm telling you, had to be expensive. All that destruction they did had to be expensive. They paid to do that. People need to realize that. And so, as I do now, I'd like to consult YouTube. What did the general public think? Because representation matters, but it matters what the people think. Because they're the ones that go and process it and develop it and incorporate it into their consciousness and then spew out thoughts into the world. They love this. Everybody in the comments, except a few native people that I could figure out were native, most people love this. No one's like, oh man, look at that terrible thing they're doing. Look at all that native art they're destroying. This and that. I think mostly because people know it's trash. People know it's bullshit. People know that crap is just for tourists. But then you got some random native comments spattered around and like, man, you look at that pottery. You could have made jewelry out of those rocks there. You could have made jewelry out of those stones that they tipped over. Because some of that native stuff in there isn't trash. And I think that was lost on the people making this movie. Some of that stuff isn't trash. Some of that stuff isn't just for show. Some of that shit actually is representation of actual culture. And it is in the form of art, but it's actually representing their culture. It's something from their culture, something passed down to them. But in the comments, man, people loved it. There were a lot of people that would have loved to, this is a cross the rope kind of thing. Don't cross this line. But a lot of people are like, man, I wish I could do that. Man, that looks fun. Man, this is awesome. And I think also people were just excited. These videos, these scenes got a lot of traffic. Millions of views, because the sequel to this came out in 2019. So for the longest time, people had just these YouTube clips online, 10, 11-year-old clips that they were watching. And from 2009, they were like, man, I wish there was another one. So when the hype started building around the second movie coming out, people started flocking to watch these again. So the comments were 9 years old, 10 years old, and then there were, well, what's 2009? Geez, 12 years old. Some of them were 12 years old, and then some were as recent as a year ago because of the sequel that came out. So it's a mixed bag usually in the comment section, but overall, people didn't address the native shit. There was no like blatantly, racist comments made. People weren't discriminatory in their comments. They were just like, man, to be able to have that freedom to just destroy shit, that looks fun. So I thought that was positive. But the natives, everyone that I could see was a native in their comments. They were like, oh, that's not very nice. Everyone was like, this feels weird. This doesn't feel right. So yeah, I think that, so let's put Ian in this. If it was let's redo this. Let's do a native Zombieland movie. There's 4 natives. They walk into a trading post. I'm probably just gonna go to the fridge to see if there's soda still fresh in the fridge and if the refrigerator's still on. But I'm not gonna go stealing stuff or knocking over, a freaking store just to get some shit. I'm probably going to go to the pawn section where they have the guns, because they probably got guns there. I'm going to go there because that's where all the good stuff is. I'm going to go to the pawn side of the store to find all the good stuff. Maybe they got some keys to a vehicle that maybe they have a dead pawn somewhere, a broken down vehicle in the back. Who knows what's in those vehicles? So that's probably what I would have done. And if anything, if I had this destructive nature about me, I would never do this. I mean, I'm native, of course, but I wouldn't do this. But I would never do that. I would probably go to somewhere like Skull and Bones at freaking Yale and knock that place over and get the bones out of the basement. Whoever's bones are actually down there. Go to a freaking bullshit museum. Go bust a bunch of glass and take all the artifacts and take it back, Take it back to the original owners of the land. Even though everyone's dead, at least like give it a final resting place. Land back. That's how I would view a post-apocalyptic world. I'd be like, finally, land back. I would go straight home and just be done with the world. I wouldn't go to Pacific Planet. Pacific Planet is such a Bill Agana thing to do. I wouldn't do that. I would go straight back to my res and be like, bro, no one is going to bother us here. Isn't this great? Isn't this great to have all of it back with nobody coming for it? Overall, this movie is a great watch. I love this movie. It's definitely making fun of zombie movies, so some purists really don't enjoy it. I've noticed that. But to me, I view this in the same vein as Shaun of the Dead, Warm Bodies, Army of Darkness, that whole trilogy, Return of the Living Dead. They warm my soul. Those are great movies to me, and I just love watching them. And I was stoked too when the second one came out. It's 10 years later, but I could go without it. There was no destruction of an arts and crafts store in the second one. I watched it specifically looking out for that, believe it or not. And they never had it. So this really was a one and done for them. And I'm surprised there were no natives in this movie, or the second one. Because we'd make it in a post-apocalyptic world. You know that. You know that for a fact. We'd retreat to our homelands where nobody wants to go. Nobody wants to be on a res, even in a post-apocalyptic world. But that's the first place we'd go, and we'd be just fine. So, something I have abandoned a little bit in my recent episodes is, will I show this to my son? So let's do a little bit of a recap. Yes, I will show this to my son. If he's even remotely interested in zombie movies, I'll gladly show this movie to him. Gladly. But I'm not going to force it on him because, I don't want him to just watch zombie movies at a young age. That's kind of a tough call to find out. When is it acceptable to do that? But, so that's it for the episode, everybody. I'm happy school's over, and I'm happy I could, give a quick short episode on this one, on Zombieland. Overall, though, really, I just lay it out for you guys to listen and, make decisions for yourself. If you watch this and you just furrowed your eyebrows, like, I got no problems with it, not a problem. If you watch this and have major problems with it, not a problem. It's up to your perspective. Everybody has different experiences, different experiences that frame their perceptions of what things are. And ultimately, this is a film. It's art. You're going to view it in a different way than other people. So, talk about it. Challenge people. If they have an opinion different than yours, challenge your own perspective. But to me, this movie, it was odd. But overall, it's just a movie. It's great. It has this weird scene in it. I don't think it affects or alters people's perceptions of Native people. But I think it definitely challenges... I would challenge what people think of whether or not that stuff in there is real. Because some of that stuff is real Native art. So, that's all I got. Alright, everybody. Talk to you later.